Good evening, and welcome to the Way Out Show. I'm your host, Dane McCarthy, broadcasting to you from the bowels of FEMA Region 5 in the United Police State of America. Today is April 11th, 2014, and we're in the midst of spring weather finally, and so we're all going to be hopefully outside enjoying that, along with the rain that makes the flowers grow. So the weather is finally looking up after the long, hard winter, the hardest winter that we've seen in the Northern Hemisphere, they say, in about the last 40 years. So what's going on in the world on this fine spring day? I've got a couple of clips for you. I'll show in a minute that we have borrowed from CNN about the latest hot spot in the news, Ukraine. And some Americans may wonder, why is the United States so deeply, deeply interested in the events going on in Ukraine? What stake does the United States have in it? Why should we care? Well, the fact is that the United States has considered itself a major player on the world political stage for over, well, probably close to 100 years. And the planners, are hard at work trying to keep the United States on top of the heap, so to speak, for the 21st century. Because remember, as long as the wealth of the richest people on the planet is denominated in US dollars, as it is because the United States dollar is the world reserve currency, then they're going to fight to keep the United States top dog in the world. But everything changes, and it is inevitable that at some point world hegemony will fail. The attempt by the neoconservative forces in the United States, NATO, the European Union will fail in their attempts. Right now, the focus is on Ukraine, and covertly, the U.S. and NATO intelligence community were able to infiltrate, influence, bribe, buy the nationalistic forces hard at work fighting the very criminal regime, the elected regime in Ukraine. And as we saw, after a long, hard struggle, they deposed the government and sent the president off into exile. Now, as often happens, there were some very nationalistic and right-thinking and liberty-minded people in Ukraine who, for the best of reasons, wanted to retain their national sovereignty. As so often happens, also, there are other forces who are using them, exploiting them, giving them money and encouraging them. But then when push comes to shove, when the enthusiasm of the people and the bravery, the courage of the people, the sacrifice of the people, including many deaths, when they were able to succeed, they are the other forces, the shadowy, powerful forces behind them, want to come in and take over and put in their own puppets, their own stooges, those leaders who will secretly be working for the Western powers who want to increase their power over Ukraine and make it a satellite state of the European Union, NATO, United States, this huge empire, this Western empire. And what was the purpose? Well, as always, the purpose is the great game that has been going on for a very long time, It's a clash between enormous empires who want to keep the control, the power they have, the wealth they have, control of the natural resources, and they are using Ukraine again as the proxy battleground for the clash of these two empires. The neocons, as I've mentioned before, look at a map of the world, these unelected globalist leaders, and they decide that, look, we must try to encircle Russia. We must try to encircle China. These are our two main antagonists. And Iran, Libya, Afghanistan, and these other Middle Eastern countries are just part of the equation. We need to get control of those. Much of the world's oil is located in those areas. And so whatever we can do, including destabilizing countries like Ukraine, we're going to do that. We're going to try to get forward bases of ICBMs and the other high-tech weaponry that they have developed that the American people are not even supposed to know about at this point. And they get those, they want that little bit of an edge. They're really fighting over just a few minutes of edge in a potential global conflict, World War III, if you will, and they are very determined that they're going to just get a little bit of edge that will maybe give them the advantage so that they can win. Although many people who have more sense would say that no one could win in a World War III type scenario. The days of global conflicts on the scale of World War II are over. Hopefully they're over. They say that if there's a World War III, the old saying goes, World War IV will be fought with stones, clubs, and bows and arrows, because that will be all that's left of civilization. And that's certainly very possible. Who knows? But so let's look at this first clip that I have from CNN. It's not a conspiracy. It's just an ordinary, something you would see on your TV. So let's put that full screen and we'll play that.
Panic at Donetsk regional TV station. Journalists flee to safety. Police take up positions and repel an attack by unidentified gunmen.
I was standing by the window and saw about 5 cars driving up. They immediately got out and immediately, without any word, opened fire.
A day before, pro-Russian protesters took over Donetsk's regional parliament building, declared Donetsk independent, and called a referendum for May the 11th. Chants rang out for Putin inside the occupied building in this social media video, not verified by CNN. This unidentified speaker calls on the Russian president to send peacekeepers.
Only in Russia we see our last remaining defender of our culture of the Russian world. Only a peacekeeping force of the Russian army will be able to send a convincing message to the Kiev junta, which came to power by the means of weapons and blood.
The weekend's takeover of state buildings in Donetsk, Kharkov, and Luhansk is a serious escalation of the turmoil in Ukraine's eastern industrial heartland bordering Russia. In an address to the nation Monday, Ukraine's acting president Alexander Turchinov pointed the finger at Russia for playing out a Crimea scenario.
Dear citizens of Ukraine, yesterday the second wave of the Russian Federation's special operation against Ukraine started. The goal is to destabilize the situation in the country, topple Ukrainian authorities, disrupt the elections, and tear our country apart.
Ukraine's leaders say they will not allow foreign troops to seize Ukrainian territory, but an estimated 40,000 Russian troops are right across the border. President Putin has said he reserves the right to use military force to protect ethnic Russians in eastern Ukraine. And Russia's foreign ministry says Ukraine's leaders face a new crisis, if they don't federalize the country and give Russian language special status. Kiev is reaching out to the people in eastern Ukraine, trying to address their fears, offering to decentralize power and give financial incentives. Unlike Crimea, most people in eastern Ukraine are not ethnic Russians, but Ukrainians who speak Russian and have strong cultural ties to Russia. Lulitsa Vasilova, CNN.
Okay, well, that gives you a little bit of an idea of what's going on in Ukraine right now. And you notice that after the government of Ukraine was overthrown and a new leader was appointed, and so he appears to be quite pro-Western. He's aligning himself with the Western powers. They're the people who put him in power, and he's going to go with them. Well, as wiser heads might have concluded, there are many people in the Ukraine who identify with Russia, not the West. And that is because Ukraine has had very close ties and has been a part of the Russian Empire for a very long time, and only gained its independence after the fall of the Soviet Union. So really we're seeing an upsurge in the borders, in the efforts by the Russian leadership to sort of regain that lost territory. Of course, we know that Ukraine is in trouble financially, and so this makes it vulnerable. We know that Ukraine had a very corrupt government. Well, nothing new there. There's corruption all throughout Europe and really all throughout the world, including the United States now. There are very few countries that have a really clean government, and it's unfortunately increasing. The corruption is increasing. It's like a cancer. It spreads, gets more and more dangerous and more predatory, parasitical against the people of the various countries. This is what would happen if the Ukraine went with either the West or with Russia. Both sides are corrupt. Now, some people would say, well, but the West is not as corrupt as the East. Again, this is all changing. It's becoming more problematical for the people of Ukraine. What are they going to do? And of course, I think that the best situation for Ukraine would be to have an autonomous country with very strong borders and strong sovereignty, national sovereignty. That way they could deal with their own problems and root out the corruption if they were able to, and at least have no interference from these huge empires which both want a piece of the action. Unfortunately, there are powerful forces preventing that from happening. So what we may see is actually the dismemberment of the country of Ukraine, with the eastern part going to Russia and the western part going to the EU. And at this very moment, the eastern provinces, some of them in Ukraine, are demanding a referendum which was similar to what led to the secession of Crimea from the country of Ukraine and the addition of Crimea to the Soviet, the Russian Empire. So, and again, that was what the people wanted. And as the commentator mentioned, many of the people in Crimea were actually Russians. It's a popular Russian hangout down there in the southernmost area of Russia. As we know, much of Russia has pretty severe winters, and so this would be a much milder climate. So the wealthy people can go to the Crimea and hang out in their dashes and sit around on the beach and enjoy the much milder climate. So this is also, there's another aspect to this. The eastern provinces are the more industrialized part of Ukraine. So they have the infrastructure, they have the manufacturing capability, they can contribute to the well-being of Russia. Now, how has the West responded to this? We'll see this in the next quote, in the next little clip from CNN. So let's go ahead and roll that second clip.
Russia and the U.S. trading accusations over who's behind the unrest in the eastern cities of Ukraine. U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry saying it was clearly the work of Russian provocateurs and agents, and that their efforts were as ham-fisted as they were transparent.
No one should be fooled, and believe me, no one is fooled, by what could potentially be a contrived pretext for military intervention, just as we saw in Crimea.
He also said that Russia should be under no illusions that further escalation would have serious consequences. But Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov gives as good as he gets. This is what he had to say about American interference in the affairs of Ukraine.
With regard to the question about who was preparing and who is preparing the events in Ukraine, our American partners are probably trying to analyze the situation, attaching their own habits to others.
Russia's rhetoric appears to have shifted away from this white horse idea that Russia will step in to protect the interests of ethnic Russians and Russian-speaking people across Ukraine. It's shifted more towards calls for a national dialogue so that all parties in Ukraine can have a say in orchestrating their own future. The endgame appears to be a far more federalized structure whereby each region will have a far greater degree of autonomy that would go as far as being able to decide their own multinational relations with countries like Russia. Kiev says that this is impossible, that this kind of decentralization will lead to the destruction of the state, and that it will never happen. Diana Magnay, CNN, Moscow.
Okay, well, there you have the second clip that I had ready for you folks to see. What we're seeing here is the latest development in which it almost looks like there may be a civil war situation developing with struggling between the two sides. We know that the West employed the services of a couple of neo-Nazi groups in Ukraine in order to further their aims of getting control over the power structure within the Ukraine. And those neo-Nazi groups are just simply being used. They are intensely nationalistic. They are anti-immigration. They are probably Christian political organizations, or they call themselves Christian. And they believe in Ukraine first and everybody else out. But those people would be just another pawn in the larger game, but the tactics that the neo-Nazi groups use, using violence, thuggery, bullying, even murder, those kind of things are useful for the Western powers in order to use fear as a tactic to get what they want. A lot of these people are extremely ruthless, and they're willing to go to any lengths to achieve their geopolitical goals. So we'll see how this is all going to turn out. But 2014 is developing into another very intense and climactic year. What we may see this year is a collapse of the U.S. stock market, or what they call a correction, a major correction, And it could be in part as a result of what is going on in the Ukraine right now. So for Americans to think that this has nothing to do with us, why do we care? Well, it does have something to do with this. If the referendum is held in Ukraine and the eastern provinces decide to go with Russia, this enhances Russia's status on the world stage. And it makes it that much more powerful. It has access to more resources, to more infrastructure. And the world's investors and the corporations and those who are already extracting resources from the earth are trading at this point using the world's reserve currency, that would be the US dollar, but they are considering moving away from the dollar. So that if the dollar is no longer the world's reserve currency, then its value will drop quite a bit, and this would have a devastating effect on those multinational corporations who depend on the dollar. Now, a drop in the value of the US dollar has an upside, just like most developments have an upside for someone. That would be the only upside that I could see would be that any products that are made in the United States would become cheaper for other countries to buy because our dollars have less value. Therefore, they become more desirable for people who are using a different currency. The currency exchange rate would be changed considerably, and that would give U.S. products an advantage. The only problem with that is the U.S. isn't making that many products anymore since the corporations have shipped most of the manufacturing to other countries. Now, what that might do, of course, is to encourage manufacturers to return to the United States or locate in the United States to take advantage of the depressed value of the dollar. So that could maybe have a positive effect. There's all kinds of ramifications for big changes like this that can be mulled over and speculated about. But I do think it's important for people who are interested in how the world goes that they might consider these things and try to weigh them, the value of these things. A lot of people have their retirement invested in the stock market, and so when the stock market does have that correction, this could be devastating for their pension funds because they wouldn't be if they wouldn't simply have the funds, they would just basically vanish. That's what happens when you're in a situation like this where you don't have your money in hand, your assets, you don't have them in hand, you can't get your hands around them, then they can vanish because it's all electronic, it's in a computer, and so they could literally just disappear. And there is some talk that we may get a situation like happened in 1987, in which there was an enormous drop in the stock market. A lot of people lost a lot of money. And there were some very unhappy people in the United States as a result of that. People saw as much as a quarter or even a half of their assets just vanish overnight. And some people think that, some very wealthy people think that another correction may be coming and much bigger. And these events that we're seeing in Ukraine could possibly be the trigger. It's like a line of dominoes, the old metaphor of the dominoes, where the one domino hits the next domino hits the next domino, and so on down the line, until something that seems to have taken place and it unrelated to you suddenly drops into your own backyard and you are very much affected by those events. Not directly, but indirectly through a series of falling dominoes. So, people like John Kerry are playing the game out, you know, day after day after day. He's saying what needs to be said. Obama, again, another player playing the game out, don't know how it will work out, but doing the best they can to control the situation and make the right move on the grand chessboard, as Zbigniew Brzezinski wrote. That's the name of a book he wrote. Very apt title for how the world leaders are playing a chess game and trying to win. It's all about winning. So John Kerry knows what to say. He does the best job that he can for the people that he's rooting for, which are not necessarily the American people, but the wealthy, those in his class. John Kerry, as you probably know, is married to a very wealthy woman. I don't think he had all that much wealth, but he has a lot more than he did since he married the heiress to the, I think it was the Heinz fortune or something. Billions of dollars. He has a lot to gain and lose personally, so he has a stake in the game that makes him work extra hard. And unfortunately, at the same time while this is going on, the American people are being affected by a lot of other machinations by these, the world's less than 1%. It's probably 1/10 of 1% of the people in the United States and the world who are in control of the direction that the world goes, whether there's war, whether there's peace, whether there is going to be a buildup of the infrastructure or whether the infrastructure is going to be torn down. And that's what we're seeing a lot of in the United States right now, is actually the United States the infrastructure is being stripped out of the country, and at the very best case scenario, it's being maintained. But a lot of places it actually is not being maintained. There are actually literally roads being removed from the United States. There are, of course, train tracks are being pulled up. Enormous amounts of steel and copper and other basic metals for decades now have been shipped out of the country. It's very rare to see cars that are in people's backyards that are just sort of sitting there on blocks or something, because people are getting money for those cars, they're getting them crushed, they're getting the steel shipped out of the country to the areas where the manufacturing is actually going on. And right now, that's mostly China. If you've seen some of the videos of modern China, the modernization program that's going on, it is absolutely amazing, absolutely stunning to see what they are accomplishing over there with their untold amount of wealth that they've created by building this infrastructure, this massive manufacturing machine in which they're manufacturing goods for the entire world. Huge cities, fantastically futuristic rail systems, very fast, beautifully designed, just enormous plans in models. I've seen videos of models of these cities of the future that are planned, the Chinese government is planning. They want to make China be the country for the 21st century and beyond. And barring some kind of catastrophic depression as a result of a bubble that they may have some people say that the growth in China is a bubble and it's not really real. Well, we'll see what happens with that. But those are the two possibilities. Either China will will go into a deep recession, maybe something similar to like what happened in Japan, which they have still not been able to pull themselves out of completely, this slowdown in growth. China has had tremendous growth over the last number of years, and if this continues, they are going to surpass Europe, Russia, the United States, South America. Where the United States is in a very, very pathetic and sad situation. You have massive numbers of unemployed, which are not even on the rolls of the unemployed, way worse than what we hear about. Our press will not really tell us the real numbers. I'm afraid that they're not likely to. This is suppressed. This is censored. But we need only go to almost any American city to see the dire situation that many of the people are in those cities. The numbers of shuttered, boarded up homes, empty or torn down factory sites, the lack of public transportation. I was just reading about Detroit, in which you have many, many people who need the bus system. They don't have cars, but to get to work, they need a good working bus system. But that is very much not in evidence in Detroit at the moment because Detroit is bankrupt. And the buses themselves are old. They're not mechanically maintained properly. They oftentimes break down. So people are standing there in the cold. This winter I saw something about this, where people are standing for an hour and a half to get to work, standing at the bus stop waiting for the bus that doesn't come. And finally it does, and they're very angry and upset that they are freezing out there in the cold waiting for such a long time. And their job, their income depends on them being able to get that 10-mile ride by the bus, let's say, from their home in the away from the downtown area. Of course, the downtown area of Detroit looks very futuristic, and we know, of course, that the planners for Detroit have a new Detroit in mind and in which they will remake the city completely with very planned, with huge green spaces, with work zones, with residential zones, with stack and pack apartment complexes with these tiny micro apartments, enormous, very close in. This is the way that the young people particularly are being socialized to think that a 250 square foot or 300 square foot or 400 square foot apartment is the end thing and it's going to save the planet. And so they are being told that this is good, this is green, this is the way to go. And it's quite scary to think that this would be the way it comes down. The neighborhoods, the old neighborhoods in Detroit, many of them have been razed. If you look on a map, a satellite image, one of those bird's eye views where you see the photographs, you could look at the neighborhoods of Detroit and see enormous areas just empty. Maybe with a house here, a house there. The houses have been burned, they've been razed, everything has been the cellars have been filled in, and you just have an empty lot with nothing on it. And enormous areas are like that. I have read that the plan is potentially to raise something like 50% of the houses in Detroit. It's already downsized tremendously, and people like to think or are fearful that Detroit will never come back, but no, it will come back because these people are actually planning to bring it back but I think that they must get a lot of those local people, those poor people particularly, out of those neighborhoods so that they can start over fresh on the site. And we're seeing this in other cities as well, where, for instance, in a city like Columbus, where most of the building is going on in the very center part of the city, and enormous condos and apartments going up all over this close-in area that's a short walk from downtown or a short bike from downtown. And the people won't have to even own a car. Again, the same thing's happening in Europe and even in China. Much of what we're seeing in China with these magnificent cities on an even bigger scale than you're seeing in Europe and the United States is enormous apartment towers or condo towers with apartments. Well, this has been tried before. They used to build these these units, enormous housing units, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of closely packed in apartments, and they were basically for poor housing, and these turned into nightmares because of the crime, and the prostitution, and the drugs, and the lack of attention by landlords to fix problems. So you had leaking roofs, you had problems with roaches, and on and on and on, and got to the point where the police even refused to go into these projects at all because they were just simply too dangerous. And then, of course, I've seen this in happening in New York City, and it's happened in many other places. The projects are cleared out and either get torn down or they get turned into yuppie condos, and the whole thing becomes gentrified. And this is not necessarily just by happenstance. It just doesn't happen organically, but it's all part of the plan. They try to get people out, the poor people out of the neighborhood, out of the projects, because it's close in, and now the cool thing is to get the wealthy people close in. This will be the core of Detroit. This will be the core of Chicago, the core of Columbus, Pittsburgh, and many, many other cities in the United States and around the world. And the suburbs are no longer the place to live, and they will be left to rot and maybe a lot of them pulled down, bulldozed over, and returned to green space. Because you might say, well, why would they want to do that? Isn't the population expanding? Well, no, not really. The population is really not expanding in the United States. Most of the population expansion is from immigration. That's my understanding right now in the United States. I think Americans, for the most part, are not doing a whole lot more than just basically reproducing themselves. And what we may be seeing is a reduction in the population of the United States very soon, because we have an assault on health from so many different directions. Just recently, there was a new finding, I believe it was 2013, it came out that the lifespan among poor American women had actually reduced by a couple of years. We haven't seen this in decades. In a very, very long time. It's almost unprecedented. The direction of life, of the lifespan, the average lifespan in Americans has been increasing for a very long time. So it's alarming to see a decrease in the lifespan. But again, you might say, well, it's not that surprising that poor women would not be living as long, considering the stresses on them and the health issues that are becoming an increasing problem. We're going to be seeing more and more, and I'm not making this up, but this is what I've read, more cancers, more autoimmune diseases, more Alzheimer's in the population, and the Alzheimer's, of course, coming at a younger and younger age. You have what they call early onset Alzheimer's, in which people are getting Alzheimer's in their 20s and 30s. It used to be almost exclusively a disease of age, of advancing increased age. So there's that. Another aspect of this is people just simply aren't getting the kind of satisfaction out of their lives that they used to be getting. And why is that? Because you want, in order to have a satisfactory life, do a useful job. Feel that sense of accomplishment, that sense of fulfillment from doing a job for yourself, for your society, for your family, for your town or city or village. And again, as we're moving forward in the 21st century, around the world, they're going increasingly to high-tech job creation. Either you're designing robots or involved in maintaining robots and building robots, more and more going to robotics. An example is in trash collection. Now, it used to be that you would have a trash truck. The trash truck would be driven by the driver, and then you would have at least two guys, who would hang on the back, and then every time the trash truck stops, they jump off the back, grab the barrels and bags, what have you, that are put out by the local population on the curb or in the alley behind the house, and they would physically lift them up and dump them into the machine and then signal the driver that they're ready to go, and they would move forward to the next house and the next house and go down the street like that. But more and more what we're seeing is that those dump trucks, those big trash trucks, are turning into robots. There's a robotic arm now that they're using in some American cities and also around the world, which picks up the trash. And those two guys who used to hang on the back, and that was a pretty good job, by the way, to work for the city picking up trash. The hours are early in the morning, but hey, you got done by noon or 3 in the afternoon or something and have the rest of the day free, and you probably smell like trash or garbage, which is sort of a downside, but the money was good. Those guys are gone. There's more, and we're going to see that they're going to be gone in more and more cases in more and more cities. And what's next? Well, the next thing will be that the driver will be gone, so that the trash pickup truck will be entirely robotic. And so there goes that job. And what are these guys going to do? What are these working class guys going to do with themselves? Not everybody can be trained to maintain robots or, let's say, design programs for a computer. Not everybody is talented in that way, or they even want to do such a thing. Some people like hands-on jobs, or really that's all they're capable of doing. So this goes part and parcel with the plans of something like Agenda 21, which has a specific purpose and plan to reduce the population of the world a tremendous amount, by a huge percentage, up to, I've heard, as high as 99% reduction in the population of the planet through sterilization and other means. One of those means, of course, as I mentioned, is getting people not to have children. Fertility rates are definitely down. I was just reading an article last week, I believe it was in the New York Times, in which that they were saying fertility rates are down all over, across the board, in America and other countries around the world, except for, I believe, a couple of countries in Africa, in which the fertility rate was not down. And that means, of course, fewer children. Now, they didn't go into why they were down, but I've read that in other locations, in other places, that the reason why the fertility rate is down is because sperm counts are down in men, particularly in the West, in Europe and the United States, in developed countries. And what would be the reason for that? Again, that goes back to the assault on the health of human beings in the developed world. With the processed food, in which you have a reduced nutritional level, you also have something like maybe the toxins in the food, BPA, for instance, with the estrogen mimicker, which actually will feminize the men, and this leads to a reduced sperm count. The women also, of course, get ultra feminized, and this leads to breast cancer and other health problems. And this is not by accident, all part of the larger plan to reduce fertility around the world to get that population down. In some places of the world where they can get away with it, they're literally giving people vaccines which have a hidden sterilant factor in them, which will sterilize or reduce the fertility of women. This is in third world countries. We're seeing this like in Africa and South America and India, Asia. So whenever you can get somebody like the Bill Gates Foundation people in there who are advocating this method of sterilization, then, and of course, you know, the people who are being sterilized, they don't know this. This is a secret sterilization program. So it goes. This is how things are developing in the United States and the world, as I see it right now. On a different note, I saw the movie Captain America, The Winter Soldier, and I was pretty interested in it. Now, it's a very, it's an action movie. It's about superheroes, comic books. It's really an animated comic book. But I thought it was interesting because they touched on a lot of the most diabolical, sinister aspects of life in the 21st century with the new technologies developing. Captain America and his girlfriend actually find a bunker in which is a whole room full of computers, old-fashioned computers, and they turn it on, and lo and behold, one of his old enemies from World War II era, this Nazi, is alive in there. And he's living inside this computer. His brain is living inside this computer. His memories, everything that is him has been digitalized, and so he has immortality. And he proceeds to explain to Captain America the plan for the 21st century, in which he includes mentioning that they are going to bring in the New World Order. And so he finds the guy that's behind much of what's been going on in the movie, which is that S.H.I.E.L.D., which is a fictional Marvel kind of a CIA kind of secret intelligence, black ops organization, which supposedly is protecting America from the super criminals that are out there. Well, S.H.I.E.L.D. has been infiltrated by this negative and evil organization called Hydra, another fictional organization invented by Marvel. This is probably way back in the 60s. And so Hydra is actually inside S.H.I.E.L.D. and basically running S.H.I.E.L.D. And so through various means, Nick Fury and Captain America managed to turn it around and get Hydra, at least temporarily, out of SHIELD. But it was interesting to me because it addressed some of the issues that we appear to be facing now, in which you have the government on the surface and the surveillance and intelligence gathering organizations, and we have many of them, at least 16 in the United States, that are secretly being infiltrated, and so that they're really doing something completely different than what they're saying they're doing. What they're saying they're doing is protecting us from the bad guys, protecting us from terrorists, gathering important information in order to make the apprehension of terrorists easier, so to help the American people. But what in reality they're doing is something completely different. And the NSA is the one most of the news now, and as you know, it's been revealed that the NSA is actually spying on everyone and getting all their information, all their emails, and all their Twitter, and all their Facebook, and all their telephone calls, and gathering it all together in supercomputers, and able to analyze it and draw conclusions and do whatever they want with it, with no oversight whatsoever. And you might say, well, you know, I don't have anything to hide. I'm completely just, you know, law-abiding citizen, upstanding member of the community. I'm not a criminal. I have nothing to fear. That's good. That's good. They're going to protect me. Well, no, not necessarily. When you consider that if the NSA has access to everyone's important information in their communications, why wouldn't they go after those people who are making deals, who are captains of industry, who are making what they think are confidential phone calls about deals that will affect something like the stock market? And then using that. Or how about to enrich themselves? They have the inside track on the stock market they could use to enrich themselves. This would be a great temptation. If you have that kind of power, that kind of information. Information, knowledge is power. The same thing goes for information like of illicit behavior or embarrassing behavior by our leaders. They would know about this. They could use this to blackmail our leaders, to manipulate our leaders, to prevent them from exposing the NSA crimes. Of course, this is all illegal. And this is the reason why the NSA is a danger to the well-being of America and the world, because the temptation is too great. They're already willing to break the law to gather the information. Why wouldn't they be willing to break the law in order to use that information to enrich themselves, or to prevent government from reining them in, or to gain even more power if they can get our leaders in their pocket because they have something like a sword of Damocles to hold over their head, like something to embarrass them or maybe compromise them, then they would clearly have a strong incentive in order to use that information to increase their own power. Why, if they have such a great thing going, and they do, why would they allow the American government to actually put the damper on them, to destroy them, or to weaken their power? They're not going to allow that. We've already seen that in the CIA. In fact, there is some evidence to indicate that the CIA and the NSA are actually competing with each other, and that there's actually a covert war between the NSA and the CIA, that the CIA sees itself as the true defenders of freedom, and that the NSA is a threat. And of course, if the NSA has access to all the secret communications of high-level CIA officers, why would they not use that information in order to discredit them or get them fired or get them jailed or whatever? Because both these organizations are involved in criminality. So they're going to be using the information they have to as leverage to increase their power, to maintain their power, to get themselves in a even more powerful position. This is a great danger. The banks, those who are interested in getting control over the banks, how about if the NSA wanted to get control over the Federal Reserve System, and they were able to have all the information from, I believe there's 12 Federal Reserve banking centers, and they all have their officers, their presidents, their CEOs. These bankers, some of them, or maybe all of them, are involved in criminal behavior. If the NSA had the goods on them, had the evidence on them, why would they not use that power that they would have over these very powerful bankers to manipulate them for their own gain? The possibilities when you have total information awareness are endless. You could make yourself emperor of the world. So it is, I guess you could say, is it any wonder that James Clapper, who's the head of the NSA, has created an elaborate control room, an elaborate set that is an almost exact duplicate of the bridge of the Starship Enterprise from the TV show or the movies Star Trek. And that's how Clapper sees himself, as some kind of science fiction hero who's going to maybe, I don't know what, take over the world, take over the universe. He's a megalomaniac, as well as a liar, because he's already been caught lying to Congress, saying that the NSA was not getting all the information, every bit of scraping up every bit of information from the American people, when clearly he was. So this is how what we're looking at here for the 21st century. We'll see how it all goes. So that's all for today, folks, and sleep well and have a great weekend.